All right, so we welcome Perry Edwards, our new Salida District Ranger, to our member meeting. And we wish we had more members attending this. Oh, there's Jim. All right, good. So we can give it, well, it's 10 after 6, so they should be here. And we don't want to use up your time. So we're just going to do what we can do. But you've got most of the board members here and some members. So I don't know, maybe they're out fishing, but I'll turn it over to you, Jim, and Perry rather, and you can give us some background and tell us what we can expect from the forest.
Okay, well, I had my struggles as well, because I was sure I had the link to this at one point, but by the time I got home with my computer, I was like, uh-oh, it says see Zoom link. It doesn't have some link. So we're in it together with this. So I just like to introduce myself. My name is Perry Edwards. I am a recovering fisheries and wildlife biologist and hydrologist by training. My education was the class of 1990 at The Ohio State University in wildlife.
Nice.
So was I. So were we.
30 years before you.
Well, mine was way back before the turn of the century as well. So, but it's been a long time since I've lived back there. I've explored the Pacific Northwest for a good portion of my career. I was in Central Idaho in the Nez Perce National Forest as a fisheries technician, and Northern California as a wildlife biologist, and then Eastern Oregon as a fisheries biologist for a while on the Mount Airy National Forest. And in 2005, my wife and I took an opportunity to go to Sitka, Alaska. I took a fisheries and wildlife biologist position there in 2005. And we were there for the past 17 years on the Tongass National Forest there in Sitka. I went there as a fisheries and wildlife biologist and a National Environmental Policy Act planner, and did that for about 5 years. And then I took over a district staff position, which meant I was the lead person for fisheries, wildlife, watershed, botany, invasives, timber, silviculture, and subsistence. I knew there was one more there. But I did that for about 4 years. And then in 2014, I suddenly decided that I really wanted to be a district ranger. And I had the opportunity to put my name in as a district ranger in Sitka, and I got it. And for the past 7 years, I've been the district ranger there, which I guess the short version is this taught me that I could not hold down a steady job. But what I really enjoyed about being the district ranger was that I got to not only deal with those ology things that I've been dealing with, but also the recreation aspect of things and the special uses, which a lot of people don't even know what that is in the Forest Service. And those things are not rocket science. They're way harder because they're people driven and social and political driven. And I really got excited about working with all these different user groups in doing that. And I really found that was something that I felt like I was born to be the district ranger. And so I got to take some of those skills that I had on the Mount Airy National Forest and working with range permittees and with NGOs and environmental groups, and trying to figure out ways that they could work together so that instead of spending all their money and our money on lawyers, we actually got to do the work on the ground. And so my experience back there was working with the great permittees, figure out ways to do that. And we brought in a couple of $100,000 in that funding to put cows in better places so they weren't impacting fisheries, and still allow those ranch people to graze. And it's really great. Been doing a little bit of that here too. So I came here to the St. Isabel National Forest in October of 2021.
Eric, let me interrupt for a minute. You guys, you need to mute if you're not speaking. There's a lot of background noise. That's from not being muted. You guys hear it? Whoever KR, you need
It's
to
Keith
mute.
Krebs.
You can't hear Terry talk.
I tried to go in as a host and mute everybody. So I'm going to mute Keith, which I did, and Rick. Sorry.
It's the world we live in.
Go ahead. You're
Okay.
fine, Perry.
Oh, now here's something coming back up again in the background. Oh, well done. Okay, so I've been here in Salida on the San Isabel National Forest as a district ranger now since October of last year, and really excited to be here. Some of the things that drew me to this were, again, loving to work with different interest groups, NGOs and forest users, and thinking about that multiple use sustained yield model that the Forest Service is mandated to do. So really feel blessed. My wife finally got here in February. All kinds of other logistical things that one gets to deal with in living on a small island in Southeast Alaska, and ferries weren't running for about 2.5 months, dealing with all that kind of stuff. But we're here now. So my wife, Michelle, who also works for the Forest Service, Michelle Putz, and our 3 cats are happily here in Salida area. I wanted to go over a few projects that I thought were of interest to Trout Unlimited, and then we can certainly open it up to any questions or other interests that folks on in this meeting have. One that I know that Reed was interested in was the 4 Mile and 7 Mile stream restoration. That is an area that this area has been, beavers were trapped out of the area in the early 1800s. In the early 1860s, the area was used for open range grazing, riparian areas along 4 Mile and 7 Mile creeks. Dense forest was cleared. The stream was channelized to create irrigated hay meadows and pasture land. And so we're dealing with a gully where we have a disconnected floodplain. So when we do have flood events, all that water is being funneled through there, which is terrible for fisheries habitat. And is also not good for the area as a whole, because those connected floodplains is so important to store that water over the long term and send it down later season, right? All that snow melt, it comes off, it goes down. It's in the Arkansas River and the Colorado long before it should. So we're currently working on a project now. We're just entering into the analysis phase for that, where we're going to be working with Mark Beardsley of Ecometrics, and his intent is to basically engineer what a beaver dam would be doing without the beaver there. And I'm really excited about that. I've been so excited to see all the beaver activity here on the San Isabel and on the Gunnison, where I've explored some of that country as well since I got here. And the intent is to mimic what beavers would do, try to build that slowing down that flow, creating that hyporheic flow where you get all that water that gets into the gravels and slowly moves itself down. Also planting riparian vegetation there. And the idea is that if you build it, they will come. So the idea is that we would do these structures in there, be able to get a riparian community back into these areas. And at some point that the beaver would be able to either bring beaver back in there actively or allow the beaver to move back up there naturally. We'll see how that goes. But we really need to be thinking about having that vegetation there. So if we plant a bunch of vegetation, we could create a $20,000 salad bar that beaver could come into and just mow it all down and wipe it out. So we need a little bit of time for that vegetation to establish before we dive right into having beaver in that area. But I'm really excited about this. One of the things I like to do is do forensic hydrology and going into areas and looking at areas and finding those old beaver dam complexes. You can just, if I get this vibe when I get into those areas and slowly walk around and look down low, and all of a sudden you start seeing these things that are across the floodplain that go 20, 50, 200, 300 feet, and be like, there was beaver in here at one point in time. And how important they are to those ecosystems for the fish, for boreal toads. There's all kinds of others that are involved in that. Another project that we're working with Xcel Energy on is the Fousas Dam and the Garfield Dam. Fousas Dam, we thought we were going to be able to be moving forward on that this year. Xcel has been a great corporate entity and working with us, we actually planted a bunch of vegetation. Well, we didn't plant it. We took it to our area to have it stocked and grown out. And then we ran into a hiccup. Excel ran into a hiccup with the FERC process, and that got put back a year. Excel's still being a good corporate citizen, paid the money to continue keeping the vegetation going. And we're hoping that that's going to happen in 2023 and Garfield in 2024. We're working with Colorado Parks and Wildlife to probably create some kind of a barrier to maintain upstream habitat for cutthroat and not allow other things to move into that area for a while. Oh, and I see a question. Oop, I saw it, but it went away. Can somebody read that to me? I'm welcome to take questions as we roll through this. There's a question about recreation, and I'm assuming that's tied to the Fusus and Garfield Dam removal, but it popped up on my screen for a half a second and then disappeared. Is anybody able to read that out to me? So
Yeah, I have a different question because it relates to what you were talking about before we go to Pam's.
Okay,
Is Mark doing artificial beaver dams? Is that what you're talking about?
that is exactly right.
Okay, and he's a neighbor. Okay, and Pam
Pam.
wanted to know if there are any impacts to us locally on the recent e-bike use directives, or is that only for national parks and trails at this time? But I thought it was the Forest Service, which the BLM has not come out with yet.
Yeah, and I'm shooting from the hip a little bit on that. We initially, the Forest Service was saying that e-bike is considered a motorcycle, and so that would only be allowed on motorcycle or ATV trails, and not on a non-motorized. If you had regular bicycles or foot traffic, or actually regular bicycles, I guess I would say, that they would not be. I believe the newest thing I've heard with the Forest Service is the forest would have the opportunity to go trail by trail and say, could some e-bikes be allowed on that? Not ones that go 30 or 40 miles an hour, but have some kind of a restriction on how many watts and what speeds those are. But we're still working our way through that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so that's something that, yeah, we're all like, oh no, and the BLM was talking about that e-bikes would be allowed on regular bicycle trails, and the Forest Service was saying only on motorized trails. So then we get into this confusing thing where the public is like, am I on BLM?
Right.
Am I on Forest Service? And trying to be consistent across that is good, but it's not always the way we will go. So stay tuned on that. I am learning more every day on where we might go with that as well. Going back to Xcel Energy, again, CPW is interested in creating a barrier so we don't have upstream other fish moving into cutthroat habitat or other clean lineage fish moving up there. Process and engineering is pretty far down the track. We're trying to figure out the deals on what that barrier would look like and where that would be. And we need to do a site visit to look for where that barrier would be on that. And I have heard some concern from some fly fishermen and the loss of those lakes. And that's true. Those lakes would not be there anymore. Those lakes were also artificially created many, many years ago. And I think that there will be fishing opportunities in that stream system because we are doing a really good job of looking at trying to recreate what that stream would have naturally been and the riparian connected habitat, the floodplain habitat. So there would be fishing. It's just gonna be a little different. And I recognize that those folks who like to be in their chest waders, up to their waist and standing in the middle of that, it will be a different experience, but I think it will still be a great opportunity for a fishing experience.
So Perry, do you think when you make that site visit, you might let us know so we might join you? Because when we had the presentation from Xcel, which was very good, but I'm geographically challenged and I couldn't get a feel for where the Fusus was and Garfield and where the barrier might be at Fusus Creek. Is that possible, do you think?
That's possible. Let me write that down, and I'll try to contact you, at least a few representatives that
Yeah,
could be up there and talk about, what are we trying to keep out? Where would that be at?
yeah,
I'll
we
put that
could
in my
just
notes.
do a video, a few of us, especially if Tom Polka went. He's a very good videographer. And we could post that to let people know, but I know you're right, one of those lakes, and I don't know if there's any feasibility to keep one for family fishing, people like it, but probably not.
Yeah, I honestly don't believe that that would be the case. And so it would be a different experience, but I still think it would be an experience. And I've had a lot of experiences in smaller streams and fly fishing and also spin rod fishing. And it can be a real kick because we are looking at creating, pools and riffles and that natural habitat that would have been there and is down there, is further downstream of that. So I'll see what I can do about it, inviting some Trout Unlimited folks and keep you all in the loop for that.
Thank you.
Another project that we're working on right now is the Monarch Ponds around Monarch Campground. Those ponds have filled in over and over again because of the highway and all the sand that goes on the highway and erosion coming down there, and it's steep coming in, and then it hits those ponds, and that becomes a settling out area. So those are doing that. So we're trying to work with the DOT a little bit on how we can find a way to reduce that, but it may be something that we will just have to dredge out on a somewhat regular basis to keep that habitat in there. But we're looking at hopefully being able to bring that together and implement that in fall of 2022 and recreating those ponds in there. Hoping to do some site visits here as the snow is melting off as well. Another project we have is the South Prong of Hayden, where there is a barrier in there right now to try to keep out other fish away from the purebred cutthroat in there. And we are working with the engineers to improve that barrier, which is severely compromised, and getting heavy equipment up into that area this summer to try to resolve that issue. Half Moon Culvert, I have to admit, I'm not even sure exactly where that is, but we have received $300,000 from California Gulch NRD Mining Settlement to replace the large culverts at the top road crossing in there and try to do a better job of fish habitat connectivity in there. That's pretty exciting that, $250,000 to do that. We're planning on the survey this summer, design this winter in-house with our own hydrologists and engineers, and implementing that project in 2023.
Half Moon is up closer to Leadville, south of Leadville.
Okay,
Yeah.
and I see we're also working with Trout Unlimited on design, contracting, and implementation on that. So maybe you all know a little bit more about that than I do. I still feel that after 5 months, I'm still the new guy on a lot of this stuff, and I'm constantly asking people, where is that? Point at the map. I'm trying to get a feeling for this.
Sure.
And more often, I'm like, I know where that is. I've been to that area, or I've seen it on the map. I did go out last fall before the snow flew on my own time, because I have this pesky day job that keeps me in the office most of the time, and started driving around and familiarizing myself with different areas and different road systems and different lakes and different streams. And I'm really looking forward to getting out and doing more of that. In fact, I was just out today with one of the permittees over on the east side of the district, looking at that allotment, and I recognize, I was here last fall. I know where I am. So I feel excited about that, because I'm one of those people that really feel geographically challenged maybe, but I like to kick dirt. I like to be able to say, I've seen that. I know where that is. I know what that is. And so I'm working on that wherever I can. There's a project that's a little controversial. I know South Fork of Lake Creek Fire Complex, including Sayers Gulch area. They're looking at possible reclamation of the system for Hayden cutthroat trout in an out year project, not this year. I know that there's some concerns because we have some boreal toad, really strong boreal toad areas, breeding sites up in there, and trying to figure out how we could get rid of other species of fish, rote-noting fish, or whatever that may be with CPW. There's a concern that doing that could have impacts on the boreal toad. And so we're trying to work our way through that and figure out what the best way of doing that is, and also looking at the genetics of South Fork of Lake Creek to see how pure that is. Each tributary supports a self-sustaining cutthroat trout population, and apparently this area is above a chemical barrier that's caused by some kind of chemical. I think it's from mining or something along those lines. So still learning more about that, trying to figure out all the different interests and concerns, from the boreal toad to the cutthroat trout in there.
Yeah, I have a question about that that Lake Creek area that runs into Twin Lakes is extremely polluted. And unless there's a section of this, a side stream for cutthroats, that's, to me, a waste of money. But some more people, I mean, there's some natural pollution, there's some mining pollution up there that the parts of the South Fork of Lake Creek are
There.
dead.
And once Lake Creek flows into the South Fork, I mean, the South Fork flows into Lake Creek, it's, the fishery's pretty much over with.
Yeah. Yeah, so check with the powers that be on that,
Biologists.
the biologists.
Yeah, and I'm certainly, that's great that we're having this discussion, because I've not been up into that area. Twin Lakes is on my list of places to get up to. I know that's Leadville District, but just learning about that. So I will check in with Jamie Kreslock and Janelle, our fisheries and hydrology folks, to learn a little bit more about that. And I'm learning new stuff every day, that's for sure. And then the last project I would bring up, that's not directly a fisheries project, but I think has some implications on that, is dispersed camping management. We're working on that for Salida and Leadville districts right now. I mean, we have seen, and the West has seen an incredible growth in people's use of the National Forest System from COVID, but even before that, and it's not going to go away. All these people have learned about a national forest that's out there that maybe didn't know anything about that before. And we can either pretend it's not happening and fall back on our heels, or we can take an active role in that. And I feel really strongly that Salida and Leadville Ranger District are taking that proactive approach and trying to figure out the best places we can do that to allow for that camping. Some places we may need to go to campsites or develop dispersed camp areas where people pay for that, but other places we probably don't need to do that. And so we've been asking for public input on that now for a few months through our typical NEPA process, National Environmental Policy Act scoping process, but also through the story map that we had out there for, that was where people could put in things where they said were good places, were bad places. I'm really one of those people that wants to be able to give those opportunities to people to use their national forest. And I see recreation, as I like to call it, a gateway drug for a lot of people who then learn more about fishing or wildlife or all these different things. But that's that first exposure to them to get out there. And I know there's been people who have been out doing that for many years, like myself, and I suspect a number of people who are on this video right now. And then there's also those new people. And I was really excited to come to Chaffey County last fall and hear these things on the radio about responsible recreation and taking the pledge to do that and trying to educate people, because a lot of people come out and they just have no idea. They see a dry channel and they think, oh, I can just do whatever here, not recognizing that those areas can be very important for downstream areas later on, during snowmelt, during monsoon season, and all those other things. So we're working through that right now, and I'm really excited that we're kind of the tip of the spear for the Pike San Isabel National Forest and Cimarron Comanche National Grasslands. We're a little bit behind the BLM. I'm sure you're aware the BLM is doing a similar effort with dealing with dispersed camping. But the concern I always have is if we just try to shut it down, we're really just squeezing that balloon dog, which is then going to squeeze out somewhere else. So if the BLM says nobody can do it, they're going to come to the state, they're going to come to the Forest Service. And I feel like we're all in it together to try to figure out the best way to do that. So stay tuned on that. Any questions or concerns from the Trout Unlimited gang on dispersed camping in this area?
Well, I know you participated on the Envision call, which is dealing with that. And at the water forum, they dealt with that. Yeah. So when you're done, I'll unmute everybody and they can either type it in the chat or we can chime in since we're a pretty small group.
Okay. And well, that was really my last thing. And I just think that was an important one. And yeah, I was at the water forum, got to meet a lot of great people there. I love the random acts of restoration discussion and how doing this in a larger landscape scale is really important. I feel the same way about fire and fuels and dealing with all that. I mean, if the Forest Service is doing fire and fuels in one area and NRCS is doing it in another place for private landowners and BLM's doing it, we may not get that unified front that we really need across the landscape, because the landscape doesn't know who owns it. Landscape doesn't care who owns it. And so we're all in it together. And so those are what some of the things I think are really important, is that we all talk about this and we look at the larger landscape scale versus in different ownerships and different districts and all that. I don't think that's the best way to work on things. The last thing I will, I guess, throw out there is I'm working with Salina Ranger District now to really develop a 5 to 10 year plan and strategy across all functions, whether it's timber, fuels, wildlife, fisheries, watershed, recreation, to try to look at that grander scale of things and try to put all those pieces together. And there are places where we will find, as we put each different individual grouping or resource, if you will, in there, to see where those circles overlap and see where we can get that bigger bang for the buck. And if we got heavy equipment out in one area, maybe we can do work on culverts and stream channels and do that work at the same time as we're working on a recreation area or a trail or all those different things that will get us a lot more bang for that buck. And I've also been working with Marcus Seelig and NFF, and I'm interested in working with Trout Unlimited and all the different user groups to try to manage your national forests in the best way we possibly can. And with that, I will turn it back.
We have a couple questions. Pam wanted to know who you're working with at CBW on the projects that you mentioned.
I honestly don't remember the names of those folks. I have been inundated by so many people that eventually I will, because in Sitka, I knew everybody and I know that's where I
Right.
would get to. But I would be a fool to say I could remember the names. I know Stephanie Shiley, my wildlife biologist, has been a real key link on working with the CPW folks here in Salina and Chaffey County area. But I can't remember the name of those.
That's
folks.
okay. And Bob is using the technology to raise his hand. So what's your question, Mr. Hamel?
Hey, it's there for our use.
It is.
Perry, thanks for coming to the water forum. We didn't really get to talk, but I'm the chair of that group, and I think we were actually sitting together really close, but we didn't have time to talk. But my question to you, and I tried to call you the other day, I've been talking to and writing to Danny Cook, your trails manager.
Yep.
And it's concerning Porter Gulch. And there's the consideration there to open that to motorized travel. And I don't know if you're familiar with that. And I can't really say that I would claim Howard Creek is a cutthroat fishery or a boreal toad habitat. I don't really know. It's small, but it's such a small spur, and there's several reasons to not do that. And, you know, I explained it in detail in my letter, if you want to go back and look at that more than take time here. But I would definitely caution you on putting in a motorized trail there in a place that's not right now, since there is access farther down the range at Hayden Creek and also up at Bear Creek and then on Poncha Pass to access the Rainbow Trail. And then obviously, I'm sure you're aware that they can't go beyond the Rainbow Trail anyway, because it's a wilderness area. But the access there would be very detrimental to that habitat there. Well, maybe we lost Perry.
Nope.
Maybe you didn't like my question.
No.
My battery on my cell phone is low, and I just plugged it into the wall to bring it back to life. It suddenly says
Okay.
5% left. I am somewhat familiar with that project. I have been working with Danny Cook and with Ben Laura on that project. I do know that it goes up to the Rainbow Trail. I actually walked on that back last fall, where part of where that reroute would be, because right now we're trespassing on private land. So everyone who's going up that trail is doing it illegally because it's not our land to do that with. So we will be, my commitment, without giving a real answer, is we're going to be looking at the different comments, and we are going to be looking at the different user groups. And I will be weighing all those different things, which is what my job is to try to take all those things and put them together. From a resource standpoint and stream standpoint, I feel very strongly that you can have a motorized trail and not have impacts with that if you put the right surfacing and the right kind of stream crossing structures on there. But I'm also going to be looking at what the public's and other comments are insofar as the different user groups and the interest and what impacts it may have on them by opening up to them or to not opening up to them. And that'll be part of my decision.
So Jim
Do
and
you, are
Cara,
you gonna have a public scoping? Will there be a public scoping,
Well, I mean,
like
you
a
were,
meeting for the public
oh, I see, a meeting.
besides the
Well,
letter writing?
I don't know. I'll check in with Ben, Laura, and Danny on that. I know that you're involved with that scoping process through the letter writing and comments on that. And I always tell people, be specific. You know, don't say, I just hate what your project is, but say, this
Right.
project will impact my interest because. And so that's really important and part of why we do these.
I expressed that, and I just wanted to know, I wanted you to know a little bit about my background and why I think I could give you credible information and feedback rather than just blowing off and saying, you know what, don't do it.
Right.
I gave you a lot of reasons. So thank you.
Great. And I appreciate that. So that's what that process is for.
so going back to the beavers, Jim said he lives on Trout Creek. And he said there are a lot of active beavers there, so you could trap them and relocate them to 4 Mile and 7 Mile.
Right. And we may do that. Sometimes all you need to do is build it and they will come. So it may be that if we get that habitat back in alignment where it's holding that water and, you know, the beaver are more safe, because right now, my guess is that it's just a gully that's running through there and it's almost dry. Beavers aren't real good on the ground, as we talked about the water for them. They're pretty darn slow, but you put them in water and they're pretty amazing. So we may not have to do anything like that. Certainly, if we had an intention of doing that, we would be working with Colorado Parks and Wildlife for moving them to there. But again, I think it would be really important to initiate the riparian vegetation and getting the willows and alders and cottonwoods and other things in there and give them a little time. Because if the beaver come in there when it's too early, they're going to eat themselves out of house and home, and then they won't have anything to continue that out. And part of that importance of that, creating that riparian habitat and having that riparian community of plants is having it established well enough that they don't just wipe it out in year one.
Yeah, well,
I
there were a
understand that.
lot of beavers up there. We used to stock trout up there for CPW. And they just, I don't know if it's climate change and less rain or they left, because there seems to be a lot of food from my perspective. But in looking at something of that, does the Forest Service able to use drones and or LiDAR to look at that, or would that help?
We can use both of those things, and we do use both of those things in the right places at the right times. A lot of times that LiDAR, number one, can be very expensive to do, although that technology is getting more affordable. And what I would probably suggest if we were thinking about doing that is what other resources could we do in mapping an area, a larger scale area. Sometimes the economy of scale is really beneficial to do that in a bigger area versus just in a very small area. So we could certainly look at those different tools that we have. And again, their affordability is getting much better than what it used to be.
So Rick wanted to know, when they're transplanted, do beavers stay, or do they try to make their way back to their previous home, or they just stay where the food is?
Yeah, if they have the right kind of habitat, I think they would typically stay. Now, the thing with that being said, if you put mama and daddy beaver together and they procreate, which beavers are pretty good at too, then those progeny are going to start looking for their own places. So then you're going to see that movement upstream and downstream of that. But again, if we can recreate that habitat in 4 Mile and 7 Mile areas, and I know that there was actually some other areas that Mr. Beardsley was looking at, but he wasn't far enough down the line to say those were ready to go into the National Environmental Policy Act process for scoping to the public, we'll be looking at those further out, that we could create this perpetuating circumstance where they can then start moving down if we have the right riparian component. But we've got to have that vegetation, or we're not going to be able to pull that off.
So Pam wanted to know, and you might not know this either, where the 7 Mile area is. It's up in 4 Mile. You turn before the tunnels, Pam, and go up in there and past 4 Mile and more to the east, you'll come to the 7 Mile Creek area. So what determines for the Forest Service when a district has an aquatics person or not?
A lot of times it comes right down to just having the funding to do that. And so right now we have 2 people that are for the whole San Isabel National Forest that are shared or zoned. And that's Jamie Kreslock and Janelle Valjeres, I think her name is the fisheries biologist that we utilize. And I'll be frank, I mean, in the rainforest, we had at least 1 fisheries biologist on every district, but we had a heck of a lot more water and a lot more riparian areas. I come here and I'm like, oh, well, there's one. And I don't see it anymore for a while. So I think a part of that is simply that you just don't have the streams and the riparian areas that would be able to fund those people with the projects they would be doing. But we certainly can look at our zoned employees and do look at those, and also look at other parties. Like Mark Beardsley came to us and said, hey, I got a great idea, and we can probably get funding for that. So great, that will drive that forward. And the more of those we have, and the more partners we have in that, the more projects we will be able to get. And whether it's NFF or Trout Unlimited, I worked with Trout Unlimited a fair bit when I was on Sitka Ranger District on the Tongass, and we did a number of restoration projects in riparian areas and adding large wood to streams where they actually removed the wood from streams and hauled timber down those streams back in the 60s. And also, I'll admit it, we had biologists, fisheries biologists back in the 70s that thought all that large wood was getting in the way of the salmon. And so they cut it all out of there. We know better than that now,
Right.
but we can't go back. We can only go forward. So we went back into those streams and did hand placement of large wood. I was actually involved with that, and it was a lot of fun. Part of my interest in fisheries and hydrology was basically when I was a kid living in suburbia, Ohio, and there was a woodlot right by my house. And I climbed every darn tree, and I knew all that area, and I went down into the stream, and I rerouted the stream and made little ponds and did all that stuff. And then heck, I learned later on, that's actually a career. How cool is that? People will pay you to do this stuff, and you can either do it with chainsaws and winches and humans, or excavators and bulldozers, all that big equipment. And that became what I did for a number of years before moving up into the different echelons of the Forest Service, and now becoming a district ranger, which again, I truly love, because I get to work with all the biologists, and I get to work with the fire folks, and I get to work with all these different members of the public to gather their input and try to find out. I will say oftentimes the decisions I come to are ones that everybody says, it's not my favorite, but I can live with it.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is, if one person says, I love it, I will guarantee that somebody else out there will say, I hate it.
Right.
And finding that common ground where everybody says, I understand where you're coming from. And that's one of the things I really try to work hard on, is when I make a decision, I really try to give a very clear rationale. I didn't just make this up arbitrarily and capriciously, as we say in the attorney business, but I thought about all these different dynamic tensions. I thought about all these different interest groups. I thought about all the laws, regulations that the Forest Service has to guide us in our forest plan to guide us. And here's where I come to it. And I think I do a good job of that. And I think that most people would say that I make good decisions that I can back up where they came from. So I hope that I can follow that in my tenure here on the San Isabel National Forest. And I will say that I really do enjoy being in this place. And my wife and I, after 17 years on the Tongass and Sitka, where we had 14 miles of road, 100 inches of precipitation in a year, it was amazingly green. and we had as many brown bears as we did human beings there, and it was really beautiful, and the whales and all that stuff were great. We were ready to take that new adventure and that new exploration, and Salida and Chaffey County and the San Isabel feel like a fantastic place where we have landed. So I feel incredibly blessed to be here.
Are
Eric,
you, go ahead, Jim.
if you look at the screen, you'll not notice very many dark-haired people. We very much like to participate in conservation projects, but we have limitations. Like we probably couldn't do very much participation in the removal of the dam at Fooses Creek. That's heavy equipment stuff. Can you think of some projects that you might be able to use some old farts?
Absolutely. I think that, maybe part of the revegetation of Fooses and Garfield Dam, getting people out there and training them how to put that vegetation in and knowing where those different parts of that connected floodplain and higher up on the floodplain and putting that stuff in. I have utilized volunteers for that many times. And I think that's really fun for folks. And sometimes we'd even like camp out somewhere nearby and hang out in the evenings and do that kind of stuff. It could also be getting cuttings for things that would then go to our nursery to plant that in. And I think there would be an opportunity to work with folks on something like that, as well as citizen science and getting out there and, doing the monitoring before, the monitoring after. Did what we plan to do work? Number one, did we implement it? Number two, is it effective? Is it creating those pools? Is it maintaining those pools? Is it creating spawning gravels? And number three, do we have the fish in there, which is the ultimate final thing that we're trying to look for? And I think those are really great opportunities to do that. I was involved in putting on a bio blitz some years back in Sitka, where we counted birds, we counted mushrooms, we counted fish, we counted frogs, we counted bears, you name it, we counted it, mosses, all the different groups, and that was really fun. And I think I've heard that there was something that was done up in this area some years back. Does anybody know about that?
There's a bird count a couple times a year, but I have a vague memory of something like that too. But my memory's not good. But several of you, Jim and you, have mentioned heavy equipment. Are you aware that the prison in Buena Vista has a heavy equipment program and that they have helped Trout Unlimited in some of their projects?
I am not, but that's certainly a great, as we're moving down the road or the stream, I guess, towards implementation. I'll be sure and check in with Jamie Kreslock, who's intimately involved with this project and our hydrologist for the San Isabel group. I assume she knows, but you know what happens when you assume. So I will ask the questions.
Yeah, Parks and Wildlife would know also.
Right.
So, okay, Dave has a question. Is the Forest Service redirecting the top end of Fooses Creek Trail? And if so, when will that be finished?
I don't know the answer to that. I know that, right around the dam, there'll be some redirection of that trail, but the top end of that, I don't know if they'll just tie right back into that, but I can look into that and get back with y'all on that.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? I appreciate someone who will say, I don't know, but I can find out there. And it's a big area and you have a lot to learn. And I appreciate that you have a background in fisheries, because we've felt a bit neglected, I think, this is my personal opinion, from the forest since we lost the aquatic biologists, probably 15 or 20 years ago, I think. So
That's good. The two biologists, where do they live?
where do the fisheries biologists live for the San Isabel?
I think that both Jamie and Janelle are down in Canyon City,
Okay.
on the San Carlos district is where they're home based out of.
Okay.
Yeah, and being a fisheries biologist is kind of like being a Marine. There is no such thing of an ex-Marine. There is no such thing of an ex-fisheries biologist. I love the hydrology and the fisheries aspects of that stuff. And I'm looking forward to getting out and exploring more of that as the snow melts off and access to more areas.
Okay, Rick, I'm going to let you make a plug to the board members, and I think I mentioned this to Perry before about our upcoming event. Are you there or did you leave? There you
Yeah. I just unmuted.
Okay.
Hey, Perry, thanks for your time tonight. We sure enjoyed meeting you and hearing what you're going to work on, and look forward to working with you if you can find any need for us to plug in and assist. 2 reminders coming up next week. We have the annual river cleanup with ARC Headwaters Rec. Cities of BV and Salida, Garna, ourselves, BLM, Saturday. So a week from the Saturday on the 21st, 8:30 to 9:30 is sign up. But you can sign up at any time on the website, which is posted on our website. Come out if you need supplies, 8:30 to 9:30 that Saturday on the 21st, and also get a lunch voucher for a picnic that will be noon to 2 o'clock. And trash drop off will be from 10 to 2 at Bandelier.
But there's also trash drop off in Buena Vista at
There
Public Works and a picnic up here too.
And that's
Oh.
on Greg Drive.
Okay.
It's also
So-
Colorado Public Lands Day.
It
Oh,
is.
cool.
Yeah, so everyone try to fit that into your calendar, come out and let's do some river cleanup. That's what we do.
And
Part of
count your friggin' volunteer hours and send them to me.
There we go.
Unless you're a
another-
CPW volunteer and then you send them to CPW.
You can do both, Jim.
Oh, can you?
Sure,
Double dip?
absolutely. Happens with the feds all the time, right, Perry?
Vote early and often. Yeah, and again, I would throw out another thing, an idea in how to try to Unlimited help is a lot of times if there is a project out there and we are trying to get funding, the more different groups have skin in the game and put funding into that, the more likely that other groups are going to want to dogpile in, and the federal government will say, well, gosh, we can't let these other folks just, try to do this without us helping. So if there are projects that you have an interest in, or there are projects that I think you may have an interest in, I will certainly share those with you. And if you can work your way up through the higher levels of Trout Unlimited and see if they have, I'm sure they have restoration funding available as well. The more different groups that do that, the more it builds on itself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Perry, you should come out 2 weeks from tonight. We're meeting at Moonlight Pizza at 4 p.m. for a little social food, happy hour, get together, and opportunity for membership to meet 3 of our new board members, as well as any new members of our chapter. That's a Wednesday night. So if you're not doing anything and you want to meet any of us, come on out. We'll have some door prizes and it'll be a little bit of fun. Bit of, hang around and meet and greet. So.
And I hate to be needy, but if Karen, if you could send me those emails on that, because I had to move away
Sure.
from when I was writing down notes and I'm stuck
Sure.
to the 2-foot leash on my cell phone cord to keep the thing alive.
Yeah.
But I would appreciate that. That'd be great.
Okay,
Good. Good. That's, I've got Karen,
I got it.
two events coming up in the next 10 days.
Right,
Thanks, Rick.
do.
That's
Thank
it.
you, Rick. And just an FYI to you, Perry, you wouldn't know it by this attendance, but we do have over 300 members. And this is the lowest attendance we've had in 2 years, I think. And I don't know why. We've had 20 or 30 people. We used to have in person, and we hope to, I think, Pam and I were talking about this, to go back to in-person and or hybrid meetings starting in the fall. But that's for a board meeting, which we'll have on June 8th. That'll be the end for the summer, maybe. So anybody else have any comments, questions before we let Perry go have dinner?
Just a quick comment, Karen. the Fly Gals are having an event tonight as well, so.
I know, that's true. Yes, and we have over 100 names in our Fly Gals group. They are not all TU members, but we're very active. Jim's wife has been instrumental in making that happen. And I did mention to them, next time, look at our event and meeting calendar so you don't schedule something on the same night that we have a member meeting.
Don't tell me.
There.
Don't
Yeah.
don't messenger.
It's, no, I know. It happens.
I'll add that we also recorded this, and membership has access to all meetings, including this one tonight.
Right.
I would like to ask Perry another question. Perry, recently we went through an effort with CTU to identify priority waters in our region. And I'm sure several of those are on Forest Service lands. So I'm hoping that we can build off of that at a local, state, and national level. So that may be a good place for us to start when we're talking about local projects and local waters.
Right, and water, is connected upstream and downstream. So if there's Forest Service upstream and or Forest Service downstream, there is that connectivity, then there's possibilities that we can work together, even if it's not on Forest Service land, but there is that nexus of that stream.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Well, if that's all anybody has, Pam, maybe you can stop the recording and we can let Perry have dinner. And then if some of the board members want to stay on for